Hi everyone, welcome to the No KXL call. Thanks everyone for joining us. We are now live and we're having a couple of technical difficulties on our ends. So we're gonna wait 1 or 2 more minutes for our last couple presenters to jump on the call. And while we wait for our audience to build. So it's gonna take a couple minutes for that to happen, but we have thousands of people RSVP'd to join us today. So thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll wait 1 or 2 minutes for people to hop on the call and for us to get our technical issues sorted out here. Thanks everyone. For folks coming on, welcome. We're gonna wait 1 or 2 minutes. We have people flowing onto the call right now. We're having some technical difficulties on our end, so we're gonna go ahead and get those sorted and wait as more people flow onto the call. We have about 1,000 people on the call right now. Great, we seem to have Bill back with us. Bill, can you test your audio again and video? Maybe just say hello. Bill, can you say hi? Yes, you're working. Woo! Okay, great.
Hello, hey, you got me? Good.
Well done, Bill.
Welcome. Yay, we have that sorted. So we're still waiting for a few more people to join, and we're gonna go ahead and get started. 1 more minute. Thanks everyone for hopping on. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, and welcome to the No KXL strategy call. Thanks so much for joining us. We have thousands of people tuning in right now, some of who have been with us since the beginning of this fight, this Keystone fight, and some who are just joining us today for the first time. I want to welcome all of you. And we know that in order to win, we're going to need every single person. And we're so excited to have new friends, old friends, everyone join us today. So thanks so much for being with us. My name is Sarah Shore, and I'm the Keep It in the Grounds campaign manager for 350.org. And I came into this fight in 2011, like many of us, when over 1,250 people were arrested at the White House to call on Obama to reject this pipeline. We've come a very long way since then, and I'm really honored to be here with this amazing panel of leaders to talk about how to move forward. So thank you all so much for joining us. So this call, just some logistics, this call should last about 1 hour and 15 minutes, and we'll be monitoring questions in the chat box and on Twitter using the hashtag #NoKXLCall. That's hashtag #NoKXLCall. So if you have any questions for our presenters throughout, you can put those in either the chat box or on Twitter, and they'll be passed along to me for the Q&A at the end of the call. And if you're having any technical difficulties, this call will be recorded and it'll be viewable afterwards, so don't worry. So before we jump into our speakers, I wanna just talk a little bit about why we're here today. As many of you probably know, on Friday, the Trump administration approved the federal permit for the Keystone XL pipeline. And we also know that the Obama administration spent 7 years reviewing and then decided this project was not in the national interest and it undercut our fight against climate change. And they rejected the permit in November 2015. The Trump administration then spent a measly 2 months re-reviewing and decided to overturn that decision. But the important thing to remember is this fight is absolutely not over. Keystone XL still does not have a permit to go through Nebraska, and they can't start building until they secure that permit. And the pipeline will also have to overcome resistance in South Dakota, a national lawsuit, grassroots resistance across North America. And the purpose of this call is really to let everyone in on the various different strategies that we can use as a movement to defeat this pipeline. And not just defeat Keystone XL, but also use it as a launching point to fight hundreds of other fossil fuel projects across North America. So we know we're gonna raise hell on Keystone, but we're also gonna use the energy from Keystone to fight every other proposed fossil fuel project. So again, thanks for joining us. And without further ado, I wanna introduce you all to our incredible panel. We're really lucky to have these leaders from the Keystone XL fight. I'm just gonna ask everyone to wave while I introduce you, and then I'm gonna turn it over to you guys. So we're still actually waiting on one presenter who's having some technical difficulties getting in. That's Jane Kleeb from Bold Alliance, based in Nebraska. Hopefully she'll join us any minute now. We also have Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org, based in Vermont. Hi, Bill. We have Wayne Frederick, tribal councilman for the Rosebud Sioux tribe in South Dakota. Thanks for joining us, Wayne. We have Lindsay Allen, Executive Director of Rainforest Action Network, based in California. We have Michael Brune, Executive Director of Sierra Club, also based in California. And we have Eriel Deranger, member of the Athabascan Chippewa First Nation, and here representing the Indigenous Climate Action, coming all the way from Northern Alberta. So thank you all for joining us. We have a few questions that we're hoping our panelists can touch on. One is, what steps are we going to take to continue to fight Keystone XL? Two is, how is Keystone XL a part of the greater fight against fossil fuel extraction? And how do we address the bigger problem? And three, how can we use the momentum on Keystone XL to support fights against other pieces of infrastructure and for renewable energy and Indigenous rights? So again, if you have any questions while our panelists are speaking, you can ask them in the chat box, or you can use the hashtag #NoKXLCall on Twitter, which we'll be tracking throughout the discussion. So I was gonna have Jane kick us off, but I'm actually gonna pass it to, since she's not with us yet, I'm gonna pass it to Bill to talk about some of the grassroots resistance and some of the ideas that we're thinking about as strategies for moving forward. So Bill.
All right, well, Sarah, pleasure, and what a pleasure to get to join everybody. I'm coming from the somewhat internet-stressed rural Vermont, so I'm just gonna hope that I'm actually being here. Look, I've spent the day on one microphone or another talking about Keystone and what goes on next. And I gotta say, it's made me reflective, made me think about the course of the last 6 or 7 years as we've been in this fight. People said there was no chance, none at all, that we could win. In fact, National Journal, which is kind of the trade paper, the inside paper in DC, polled all its insider energy experts in the summer of 2011. And 93% of them said that TransCanada would have its permit and be laying pipe by the end of 2011. Thanks to amazing grassroots resistance, hasn't happened yet. It's gonna happen. I think that this upsurge in resistance will only continue. It's true that Donald Trump, in between a big truck and losing on healthcare, signed the piece of paper that gives them the right to get across the border. But that doesn't give them a route them away through First Nations and Indigenous peoples that have learned how better than anybody on this continent to stand up. That solved their legal problems, and it doesn't solve their financial problems, because so much has changed in the last 6 years, and all of it makes Keystone even less sensible, even more preposterous than it was in 2011. I'd say the main things that have happened are, one, the price of oil has fallen in half. So companies are abandoning their investments across the tar sands patch. Canada confidently expected to quadruple production in the tar sands. That's not going to happen, thanks to people like Eriel and her colleagues up there. It's amazing the number of oil companies that have run scared out of Alberta. The most recent was Exxon writing off huge reserves up there in the tar sands because they know they're never going to get at them. The second thing that happened was that we've had the 3 hottest years in human history. 2016 broke every record that we've ever had. We had temperatures that were hotter on this planet than we've ever reliably measured before last summer, when it got to 129 degrees Fahrenheit in cities across the Mideast. We're right at the edge now of what human beings can survive. We're watching the Arctic and the Antarctic melt. It is even more insane to contemplate the huge boost of carbon emissions that are coming. The third thing that's going on is the engineers have done their job, and the price of a solar panel has dropped by more than half since we started this fight around Keystone. The economics of it made no sense then, and they make no sense at all now. In a rational world and a rational country, what we'd be doing today is celebrating yesterday, midday, the state of the 5th largest economy in the world was generating 56% of its electricity from renewable energy, a new record. That's the direction that we clearly need to be heading in. And so our job is to make sure that that happens, to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get in the way of this any more than he's going to get in the way of Obamacare. 350 is working with people on the ground in Nebraska, South Dakota, not just to block the pipeline, but to build those renewable solutions. And you're going to see some pretty amazing facts on the ground as solar panels go up in the place where they want to put pipelines. We're going to make it very clear to people what the choice really is. And just as from the beginning, we're going to make sure that Keystone is not the only fight that we're having. The point of standing the pipeline was not that we thought by that alone we could arrest climate change. It's because we thought that that would be good to make a stand and let other people see where we were going. And that is precisely, thanks to all the people on this call and so many more, precisely what's happened. Now, no fossil fuel project on Earth goes unopposed. Right now, even as we're meeting here, there are people across Australia fanning out to block plans for the largest coal mine on Earth. About 45 minutes ago, the state of Maryland passed a ban on fracking, joining New York and Vermont and other states and lots of countries around the world, something that never would have happened 5 or 6 years ago. People have stopped coal in the West pipe. Nothing gets done for free. That's our job. If we can't get tax on carbon, we're going to put it on ourselves by getting in the way of everything that these guys try to do. And Keystone is an important part of that symbolically and practically. So this fight will continue with renewed vigor. And the fact that Donald Trump wants it done is one more reason why the rest of the country is going to realize what a stupid idea it is. We're already got 50 or more than half the country opposed to the Keystone pipeline, according to the most recent polling. But Donald Trump poisons everything that he touches. And for people who don't know about Keystone, the sheer fact that Donald Trump thinks it's a good idea is going to be one more reason why people understand that this is not So I guess I'll stop there and just say such thanks to everyone for making this happen for so many years. Yeah, we got to go do it again. It does feel a little bit like, mowing the lawn or something. It just keeps growing and you got to come back every where do it. But words.
Bill, I think you're breaking up a little bit now, but I think you were towards the end of your talk.
I know to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it over to Wayne Frederick from Rosebud. Like we said, the pipeline is also facing intense resistance in South Dakota, and Wayne is going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Good evening, everybody listening. And yeah, I wish we were coming together under different pretenses, like Bill said. It's much like I'd rather be celebrating the death of this thing, but nonetheless, we're here, and I hope we can collaborate as much as we can. And let's put this thing to bed. It's a total travesty that our president, our 45th anyway, is claiming that this is going to be an actual infrastructure that we need. I mean, it's just mind-boggling that all these politicians can say that straight-faced. I mean, I knew once South Dakota hadn't got approved yet by presidential permit, of course. It was the beginning of January, middle of January, when the state of South Dakota's people actually voted in a bill that was going to force any elected official to declare where they got their campaign contributions and how much those campaign contributions were, just to declare it. And literally, the governor introduced a bill to quash that and get rid of it. It was disgusting. But I'm sitting there, and I had to see if these politicians were actually going to vote this thing through. And as I'm sitting there, I'm looking across the room, and we're on the upper deck above the Senate. And I see this guy, and I'm like, that is not TransCanada's lawyer. I was like, no way. And he looked like he was one of those people that are watching his science experiment actually come to fruition. He's sitting there, and he's just intensely leaned over the edge, looking down on the senators as they give this like powerful speeches of saying why they shouldn't have to regulate themselves. And I was like, that is him. So I walked over. Eventually, I made my way through this mass crowd, and then I said, "How are you doing?" Like that, and he looked at me. Oh, hello. And then he ended up walking out, and I was like, why is he here? For God's sakes. Next thing you know, 2-3 weeks later, we see it through the PUC. They're ramrodding the permit through and reliving it, and it's like, he was there. So it's scary, but we're here, and let's get something done. But as for Rosebud, we've passed at least 7 resolutions that have opposed the Keystone from the beginning. Some of them getting a little bit more in depth about crossing our Mini-Wachoni pipeline. We have entered into a resolution and agreement with Pine Ridge, our Oglala Sioux tribe, and they control the purification plant. Ownership in the stem that comes down to deliver the water to our reservation from Pierre, South Dakota. The other ownership is Lower Brule Sioux tribe, and we're currently trying to work with them. They just went through a massive election. Their chairman had passed away. That had really ramrodded the electrical line infrastructure that was going to get them their critical electric from the dam and getting it to Winter, South Dakota, in Witten, South Dakota, in order that they could have enough electricity on the grid to handle their pumping stations. So not only does it just affect our drinking water, the Mini-Wachoni, it also affects our aquifer. Anything that poisons that, that's our backup. We get 14 million gallons a year allocated to us from the Mini-Wachoni pipeline, but let alone we account for about 30 million gallons on our pivot systems that we have that generates revenue from crops on our reservation. So I mean, all the way around, it's just unbelievable, and let alone it interferes and intrudes on our right to grant easements within our reservation, because Rosebud is unique. We are spawned out over 5 counties, and the majority says Todd County, but we're into Tripp. That's why we chose that area from what mapping we could figure out and right-of-ways. That's why we struck our spirit camp property, because they actually are trying to shoot the corners where all 4 of these quarters come together, and we can actually make that our stand when we relive our camp, and we'll be able to stand the line, I guess. But I thank you. I'd like to listen to some of the other presenters, and I'm here to listen. And as well as what Bill had talked about, is creating infrastructure from wind and solar. Rosebud, we're closer now than we ever have been in the last 3 years of trying to get our Oceti Public Power initiative going. And literally that's like 100 wind turbines. And we're entering into some contracts, and hopefully we can get that off the ground within the next 2 to 3 years. It's a $30 million project with, that's just our end. And it would create the transmission line to take it over into Wyoming area and then get it onto Basin Electric. And then on top of it, we can actually pull some off, and we can use it for our reservation as well. And then we would actually become a electric distributor. That's something we've really aimed for, and if we can go a little bit farther with that, and we wouldn't have to be worrying about coal plants and we need to go towards clean energy. But all right, thank you. I'd like to pass it off and listen to some other introductions. Good evening.
Thanks so much, Wayne. And that is absolutely the kind of power that we want to see instead of this dirty energy. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Lindsay Allen from Rainforest Action Network to talk a little bit more about the bank strategy to stop this pipeline.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining tonight and for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. So, I want to start with how this is part of a broader fight, because it absolutely is. We know that this is on a continuum of understanding that we cannot continue to extract oil, period. Oil from the tar sands is particularly damaging and problematic. There's massive implications in terms of Indigenous rights, all the way to like the vitality of our water and the air that we breathe. So we understand that this is part of a bigger conversation. And, we saw what happened with the defund DAPL movement, which is when something was considered a done deal, activists all across the country said this is completely unacceptable. And I don't want the money that I put in the bank to be used to fund these types of damaging infrastructure projects. So it is part of a broader conversation. Here's what we know about Keystone XL and TransCanada related to the banks. We know that in December, while we were in the height of the fight around Dakota Access, while these banks were in active conversations, not only with the tribes, but with people, thousands of people across the country showing up at their doorsteps, at their corporate headquarters, at bank branches, saying it's completely unacceptable that a company like Wells Fargo or Citibank is financing the support of this pipeline and this project. While that was happening in December, 21 banks thought that it was a good idea to essentially become the credit card for TransCanada, the parent company of Keystone XL. So what was renegotiated in December was a package of loans, a set of what's called revolving credit facilities. And we know that the lead banks organizing that are going to be names that sound familiar. It's JP Morgan Chase and it's Bank of Montreal, and banks that were feeling some of the greatest amounts of pressure from the Dakota Access fight, Wells Fargo and Citibank continue to think that this is a great idea. So this is really our opportunity to draw a line in the sand and say, you know, you thought that it was really painful to see how Indigenous leadership, how grassroots activists across the country really pressured you to say that this was unacceptable, so that the ripple effect was cities like Seattle and San Francisco and Davis and Oakland decided to start pulling their money out of these banks, so that even some of the banks in Europe, at this point now 2 banks in Europe have completely sold off their shares that were supporting the Dakota Access Project pipeline. You thought that was painful. You haven't seen anything yet, because we're just building and growing as a movement. We know there's going to be widespread Indigenous resistance. We know that people understand now that banks are vulnerable to public pressure. So this is really our opportunity to take advantage of this. We have some resources available at RAND.org. We'll be working with many of the folks on this call and more broadly to do a couple of things. One is we have already started sending letters to the CEOs of all 21 banks to say that your involvement in this loan is completely unacceptable. We know that massive resistance to the Keystone XL pipeline is really going to help us to make the case to banks that this is a bad idea. So for instance, the fact that there is no permit going through Nebraska is an opportunity for the banks to say, we contractually don't want to pay you all of the money that we promised when we thought it was a good idea, because we're not certain that this is really going to happen and that we're going to get our money's worth, which is how they're thinking about it. So we're going to continue to protest. There will be activities all across the country, all across North America, at bank branches. We're going to recommend that folks really hone in on Citibank and Wells Fargo, because they're already feeling the pressure. And they've said that if they could have do things over in the case of Dakota Access, they would have. So this is their opportunity to make that decision true and show us that that's what they really feel and mean. We're calling for a week of action that would target not only those 2 banks, but some of the lead arrangers in the Trans-Canada pipeline, so Bank of Montreal and of course JP Morgan Chase. And so that week of action will be in the lead up to the People's Climate March, just the week before, so the week of April 15th. So if you're interested, you know, that's going to be our opportunity to take the message to the banks, to follow the money, and to really show them that not only are delays going to be costly, but their involvement in continuing to support companies like TransCanada, who's backing the Keystone XL pipeline, Kinder Morgan, which is the parent company behind the Trans Mountain pipeline, and Enbridge, which is behind the Line 3 expansion. None of these banks should be doing business with any of these companies. It's completely unacceptable for our climate, and we need to be aligning banks on a trajectory so that they're financing a world that is capped at a 1.5 degree change, and that they're no longer financing Indigenous rights and human rights violations at the source in the case of tar sands extraction or anywhere along these pipeline routes. So we're very excited to work with you all to do that, and we think it's one of the many pieces of making sure that we're really stopping this project and stopping future projects.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. That's super exciting. And we have Jane Kleeb, who just joined us. Thanks for joining, Jane. We can't hear you, though. You're muted. So,
okay. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Great. Jane, we are going around and answering the questions around what strategies we can employ looking forward on Keystone XL, and how is Keystone XL part of the greater fight against fossil fuel extraction? So I'm going to give you a second to catch your breath and put it over to Mike Brune from the Sierra Club, and then I'm going to call on you next, Jane, to answer that for Nebraska. So Mike.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Jane. Good to see you, and good to see everybody. Some of my oldest activist friends and newest activist friends. So it's great to be on the call with you all, although like Wayne, I wish it was under different circumstances. I want to just say, to start by thanking everybody for being part of the uprising, the great American resistance. You know, if you're like me, you have put your heart and soul into this fight over Keystone for years, and you also care about gender equity. Maybe you're working really, really hard for 100% clean energy future for 100% of the people, and you believe that Black Lives Matter, and you're working for it to make it not just a principle, but a reality. You know, I think it's really important to remember that our movement, our climate movement, is rooted in justice and equity. You know, many of us have shown up at airports to successfully oppose the Muslim ban. We have made thousands, hundreds of thousands of calls to prevent 24 million people from getting their health insurance taken away. And we will, together, make sure that Keystone XL is never built again for the second time, or the third, or maybe the 10th time. Jane, you missed earlier on the call where Mr. McKibben referred to the fight against Keystone XL as mowing the lawn, which maybe we'll delve into a little bit more deeply in the question and answer period. But I do think a lot of us have this feeling like we've been here before. What I also want to start by saying is that tomorrow, as many folks have heard, we're going to get a new series of executive orders from Mr. Trump. One of the executive orders will roll back the Clean Power Plan, or will try to roll back the Clean Power Plan, which is one policy that's a key step to making sure that all of the coal and gas and nuclear power that we rely on currently for electricity are replaced with 100% clean energy. The president then will also roll back the methane standards, which will increase fracking and increase methane pollution on our public lands. And he is likely to also step forward and end the moratorium on coal leasing, which will allow for more air pollution, more water pollution, and an increase of mining, again, on public lands at taxpayers' expense. You all and myself will all be paying for it. So the thing I think that's really important to remember in a time like this is that we are immensely powerful. We are relentless. We are creative. We are visionary. We are a strong and resilient and diverse and growing movement made up of millions of people, and around the world, hundreds of millions of people. And we have had enormous success in the climate movement over the last few years. We will defeat this pipeline, and we will stand with our brothers and sisters who are fighting the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which would take natural gas all the way down to North Carolina, but won't, because we'll win. The Mountain Valley Pipeline, which would take gas again from West Virginia into Virginia. The Bayou Bridge Pipeline, which would take oil from Dakota Access down to the Gulf, where it would be exported. Line 3 in Minnesota, Line 5, which would run along the southern portion of the Great Lakes states. We have a movement that is big enough and strong enough and visionary enough, not only to defeat these fossil fuel infrastructure projects, but to win, and to make sure that winning means clean energy prosperity for everybody, for people who work in the coal fields, for people who work on oil and gas rigs, for those communities who are currently dependent on fossil fuels, but who care about clean air and clean water and clean energy, just like the rest of us. So how are we going to defeat Keystone XL? We're going to take action in the courts, in the marketplace, and in the streets. In the courts, we know that, as we heard at the very beginning of this call, this was a decision that was made in 2 months by mandate from President Trump. Public study, President Trump reversed the decision in 2 months. And we know, and we will be challenging this, the Sierra Club and many other organizations will be challenging violations of the National Environmental Policy Act and perhaps other statutes in the coming days and weeks. As you're about to hear from Jane, we're going to be fighting this in the states as well, in Montana, in South Dakota, as we heard from Wayne, in Nebraska, and up in Alberta as well. So province by province and state by state and community by community, we have a movement that is big enough and boisterous enough to defeat this pipeline. I guess I wanted to end by talking quickly about a couple things that you all can do. First thing is to keep showing up. It matters. So if you have a credit card from Wells Fargo or Chase or Citibank or any big multinational corporation that are funding any one of these projects or any other fossil fuel project, cut your card. Go to a different company. There are many companies right now that don't invest in fossil fuels, and they do invest in clean energy. We need to show up to make sure that our money isn't contributing to climate change. We need to show up to make sure that our public officials are held accountable. Second thing we need to do is to make sure that we're taking action locally for solutions. For every hour, for every day, for every weekend that we're putting in opposing Keystone XL or other pipelines, let's make sure that we're also advocating for something, for 100% clean energy that works for everybody. Make sure that we have a positive vision that is inclusive of even our opponents and people who are relying on fossil fuels right now. And then the final thing I want to say, have a big vision, is to never give up, to never give up. As we've heard, this pipeline was a done deal many times. It was a done deal back in 2009, right after it was proposed, in 2011, before 1,200 people got arrested, in 2012, right after President Obama was elected, in 2014, we were on the ropes again until the president rejected it in 2015. Some people are saying it's a done deal again, but those people don't know our movement and they don't know what we're capable of. So we are powerful, we are relentless, we are creative, and we are visionary. So don't give up, and I look forward to seeing you in the streets, including on April 29th at the People's Climate March in DC and all around the country. And with that, I'll pass it back either to you, Sarah, or to the great Jane Kleeb. And Wayne, your little sweetie behind your shoulder right there is very cute.
Thanks so much, Mike. And yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and pass it right to Jane, who can tell us a little bit more about, Jane, I'm hoping you can really tell us about the process in Nebraska and how we can all support stopping the pipeline through Nebraska. Uh-oh, Jane. You are frozen. Jane, do we have you? Let's give it 1 second. Okay, it says she left the chat. Hopefully Jane will be back. She's been having some technical difficulties. Eriel, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it to you.
Well, so hey everyone, my name is Eriel Deranger, and I'm from the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation located in northern Alberta. Oddly enough, well, not oddly enough, I come from sort of ground zero, the place where the oil that's being extracted to fill these pipelines, the numerous pipelines that have been mentioned on this call, Kinder Morgan, Line 3, Line 9, KXL, and various other ones that are being proposed on a regular basis, comes from my people's territory. What I wanted to say, for oddly enough, is that my nation has been deemed as not impacted by this pipeline. We have tried in the past to intervene in this project during its hearing processes when they were here in Canada, and we were told we weren't impacted because the port for the transportation of this oil does not start in our traditional territory. It starts actually outside of the city of Edmonton in a place called Hardisty. And I just wanted to give that as a preface because I just wanted people to recognize that there is not a lot of connection on how we're connecting these issues. And I've seen a lot of that even within these struggles, and that we have to stop playing in their playing field and allowing them to disconnect my people's struggles from the greater struggles of the folks in the United States that are challenging this pipeline, whether it's the folks in Nebraska through Bold, or the Rosebud, or the Pine Ridge, or the other First Nations and Indigenous communities along the pipeline. We need to stay connected and unified in our messaging. We need to stay connected and unified on how we want these projects not to happen, because of the futures we want to happen. And that is a future that's going to represent not just a climate that's livable, but a political climate that respects the rights of Indigenous peoples and the rights of Mother Earth. Now, I think that what we really need to sort of digest a little bit more here is that the Indigenous portion and sort of piece of this puzzle that we don't talk about a lot is that Indigenous voice has largely been marginalized from this conversation and the decision making around this, whether it's in the financial sector, as Lindsay pointed out, or whether it's in proposing these projects, approving these projects. We don't have the right. You know, there's the right of easement that's been granted to the Rosebud Sioux Nation, but we have internationally recognized conventions like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that's supposed to supply the bare minimum standards for Indigenous folks. And that includes free, prior, and informed consent. And the entire tenet of UNDRIP is self-determination. What I've heard from the other speakers is that this project, the KXL, represents a massive impact, not just to the land and to the environment, but to the security and sovereignty of communities, whether it's Indigenous communities in South Dakota or the communities in Nebraska, where they're having their waterways impacted, their electricity systems impacted, their food security and their food sovereignty and their ability to continue their everyday lives. For me, though, what's interesting is in the beginning of this conversation, as Sarah introduced it, is that she talked about it starting in 2011. For my community, we have been challenging Alberta's tar sands since the 60s. This is something that I grew up fighting. This is something that I grew up challenging. It's not something that I sort of decided I wanted to take on this fight. It's something that I felt I had no choice but to do. And every single year, more and more projects are being proposed in the territory. Every single day, we are seeing the contamination and destruction of our water systems. And we have to come together to recognize that this pipeline is a symptom of that. That this whole fight, including the KXL fight, started with the goal of stopping the tar sands. We came together as a coalition of organizations, individuals, to stop fossil fuel extraction, dirty fossil fuel extraction, and particularly the Alberta tar sands. And it was because of the size and magnitude of the projects that exist in my people's territory that we looked at alternatives and moving towards finding ways to keep oil landlocked. And the Keystone XL fight is that fight, is trying to ensure that this oil does not get to market, to lag in the financial sector, to allow us to be able to target the financial sector, to target our politicians, to say that this is not the right choice while building possible futures that will not have outcomes that lead to the destruction of Indigenous rights, the destruction of ecosystems and biodiversity that's critical for climate stabilization. And we looked at the landscapes, and the KXL is a perfect target, and it still is the perfect target. It's through the heartland of the United States. It goes across critical aquifers, not just for Indigenous communities, but non-Indigenous communities. You know, I just want to say, like, even James Cameron, who came to our territory, I believe that was in 2010, said that he didn't want to make the movie Avatar until the technology to develop it was there, because he wanted to do justice to his film. And then he equated it to the fact that we need to not develop tar sands until we have technologies that ensure that communities won't be poisoned and that there's no degradation to the environment. We have to keep pushing and putting, you know, that stick in the spoke of the wheel of business as usual. And the Keystone XL is that fight, but we can't lose sight of the bigger justice piece. We have to fight for the inclusion of those that have been marginalized from the decision-making processes since the colonization of the Americas. We have to ensure that the rights and cultures and values of Indigenous communities is included in the decisions of how we move forward in the new energy paradigms that Michael has talked about, that Lindsay has talked about. We can't be making the same decisions over and over and over again. And I just implore you all to continue this fight, because you won before and will continue to win. And we have seen projects canceled, people removing their investments in my people's territory. And every single victory is a victory and a relief for me. It's a relief to think that my community may have the ability to save what is left of our landscapes, of our culture, and our identity that is intrinsically linked to those places. And so I thank you all, and I really want you all to continue to recognize that fight. And I welcome you, any of you, to come to Alberta, to visit the tar sands, to see what we're fighting for, and to see how critical it is that we keep those biospheres intact and connected, not just for the environment, but for the culture of the people that exist there. Thank you. Masicho.
Thank you so much, Eriel. Thanks for reminding us where this fight really started and where it's been being fought for so many years before Keystone XL was even proposed. I'm going to turn it over to Jane to talk about Nebraska.
Hey there. So first, apologies. I'm literally doing this in a parking lot, which for people who know me and know how I fought the pipeline with all the folks who we were standing shoulder to shoulder with in Nebraska since 2010. It's no surprise. I live in my minivan. We call it Mom on the Minivan. She has over 200,000 miles on her, and that's all Keystone XL miles fighting this pipeline. So I apologize for the bad lighting, for the bad sound, that I'm in my car. I got the time zones mixed up on my Google Calendar, so apologies. But I first want to point you to boldnebraska.org. That is where you will find not only facts and backgrounds on Keystone XL, but you will also find the addresses for the Public Service Commission members. And we can fight this pipeline and we can stop Keystone XL if we can get 3 out of the 5 Public Service Commissioners in Nebraska to say that they reject this pipeline route, and that is critical. And they are not used to getting public correspondence. And so members of Congress are kind of used to getting phone calls and letters, but these public service commissioners essentially really operate in a vacuum. They have never really gotten public pressure. And this is literally the first time in Nebraska's history that they will ever have a pipeline application in front of them. And that is only because of all the Keystone activists around the country and in Nebraska, because we fought to have a law to make sure that Nebraskans had a say in where a pipeline would go in our state and what type of safety safeguards were put in place to make sure that if a pipeline got built, it was protecting the land and water as much as possible. So this is literally ground zero for the Keystone XL fight, is those 5 public service commissioners. And we need you all to be calling, emailing, writing them letters. And when it comes time for the public hearings in the state of Nebraska, which we will soon find out in about 2 weeks, we'll find out who the formal interveners are. That's the kind of legal definition of how somebody can cross-examine TransCanada and the evidence that they'll put forth. And we have not only some great Sioux Nation tribes that have applied to be interveners, we have farmers and ranchers, 85 of them who refuse to give up their land to TransCanada. They're the last holdouts along the entire route. And they refuse to give up their land to this foreign corporation. And we also have the Ponca tribe of Nebraska. And what has been left out of the State Department study, and what's been left out of all the conversations before, except all of those of us who've been fighting the pipeline, is that the Keystone XL pipeline actually crosses the Ponca Trail of Tears. The Ponca Trail of Tears is the path that the Ponca tribe was forced to walk in the snow, in the rain, in the cold, and then the extreme heat from Nebraska all the way to Oklahoma, where they were forced to leave their homeland. And so we've been planting Ponca sacred corn in that Ponca trail over the past 4 years, and we'll have our 5th planting in late May over Memorial Day weekend. So we invite you to come to Nebraska to plant that corn. We plant that as medicine, but we plant that to show that we are, every single one of you on the Google Hangout, are seeds of resistance. And the way that we fight this pipeline is continuing to be those seeds. And so I invite you to come to Nebraska, go on boldnebraska.org to make sure that you get the information for the Public Service Commissioners and join us in this fight to stop Keystone XL for the 3rd time. And I'll just end with saying that there are 85 landowners who continue to refuse to give up their land. And so even if the Public Service Commission gave TransCanada a route and then gave them the right to use eminent domain against those landowners, we will fight in court. 85 individual cases, we will fight in court over the use of a foreign corporation to use eminent domain for private gain on American landowners. And that will take years. And so it's up to all of us to continue to do nonviolent civil disobedience, creative actions, write public service commissioners, and continue to support the tribes and the farmers and the ranchers, because they are on the front lines of this fight, and they can only continue to stand up if you stand with them. So thanks for being on the call.
Thanks so much, Jane. Thank you so much to all of our presenters, and thanks to everyone for dealing with the technical difficulties which switched up our orders. But really appreciate the insight from so many different aspects of this fight. And we're gonna go ahead and jump into questions from the audience. We've had people typing questions in the chat box, tweeting questions on Twitter. And this first question is for Wayne. It's a question from Rodney Monroe. And the question is, will the Rosebud Reservation host another Standing Rock type camp? And Wayne, maybe you could talk a little bit about what the plans are in South Dakota around that.
We are setting up that Friday is actually Spirit Camp Day for the Rosebud Sioux tribe. And we're going to have a prayer vigil and a gathering at the camp. And every Friday after that, for at least a couple months, until we know exactly what the status is of the camp, or I mean of the pipeline, that yes, we will revamp, we will relive, and we will have our Spirit Camp, which is Shielding the People initiative. You can see that, and we'll be posting a lot of stuff and updates on there. Oyate Wahachaka Wowichun is the Lakota term for it. And yeah, we will be having a camp.
Thanks, Wayne. And while it's on you, I'm actually going to ask you another quick question, which is about there's a question about whether there are any lawsuits planned from the tribes in South Dakota, in addition to the national lawsuit that Mike talked about earlier.
There was some talk at the last Great Plains Tribal Chairmen's Association meeting, and I haven't been able to speak to my chairman about it. But yeah, they wanted to look at what is the possibilities and the angle of a class action lawsuit with all of us together.
Great.
Because as a Sioux Nation, we have the right to grant easements or deny, not just consultation. It should be consent.
Thank you so much.
Also,
oh, go ahead.
Someone texted me privately while the thing was going, the interviews were going. I think it was Lindsay that talked about divesting. We at Rosebud have actually really been trying, and if anybody knows a different credit union or bank, they need to come to Rosebud Sioux Tribe and get one going. We'll probably give you some sort of building to get one going. We divested $5 million from Wells Fargo, and that was extremely hard. We had to try to find a bank that was willing to take it in Valentine, Nebraska, and luckily they came through with for us, and we're getting to know each other, I guess. But $5 million was removed. I mean, I myself even divested and moved my mortgage from my house. We got 2 tribal government entities that are chartered companies. We got them to remove. I mean, even though it's only about $250,000, you know, I guess we got to do whatever we can.
Thanks so much, Wayne. So the next question is from Walden Matthews, and the question is probably for Mike and anyone else that wants to jump in, but can you talk a little bit more about the federal lawsuit?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for the question, Walden. So the federal lawsuit hasn't been filed yet, but what the clearest violation is over the National Environmental Policy Act. If you joined the call in the beginning of the call, Bill talked a little bit about how, well, Sarah opened the call by saying how The Obama administration took years, as we know, to study this issue, study it some more, to look at different aspects of the proposed pipeline on air and water quality, climate. Many of us had concerns about that procedure and the process that they went through. But then in retrospect, we appreciated the final decision, and Trump took 60 days to have his State Department reverse it. The U.S. State Department finished its previous study in 2014, and since then we've seen a plummeting of oil prices, which reduces the profitability of certain operations. We've seen the tremendous growth of clean energy generally, as well as clean energy vehicles, which reduces the demand for oil. We have had more information about the threat of the climate crisis globally, and we've had more information that's come out about the impact of tar sands and the difficulty of cleaning up tar sands oil, both on land and in the water. These are all factors that would have and should have been considered if there was a more appropriate process that is mandated under law under the National Environmental Policy Act. So we're looking really closely at, and we'll be filing a lawsuit shortly, along with many others, about the National Environmental Policy Act. What we're also looking at is potential violations of the Clean Water Act and a few other statutes as well. But that, the order just came down on Friday, so we have more to look into in that regard.
Thanks, Mike. Eriel, can I turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about some of the proposed projects in the tar sands that would contribute to filling the Keystone XL pipeline? Oh, I think you're muted, Eriel.
Is that better? Can you hear
Yes.
me? Yeah. So I just wanted to say, Mike, I believe it was Mike, said, never give up. And I just want to say, like, that is something that, as an Indigenous person, is a part of our entrenched identity. Like, our existence is a form of resistance and a form of the fact that we've never given up. And even though we are experiencing almost 60 years plus of tar sands development in our traditional territory, we still continue to fight it on a regular basis. And right now, my nation is an intervener in the largest ever proposed tar sands mine by a company called Teck Resources Limited, which is actually a coal mining company. They've never actually done oil and gas, and they've decided to enter into the foray of oil and gas. And not only are they just entering into this, they have proposed the largest ever open pit mine. This mine will be 16 kilometers from the boundary of my community. And it will be right adjacent to the river system that is critical for our community as far as water, as far as a navigation point, because Fort Chipewyan is a flying community or traversed by boat. It will dewater the system, and it will create 4 megatons of emissions that will affect global targets for climate change. But it will create 266,000 barrels of oil every single day from our territory. And that's the type of oil that is necessary to fill these pipelines that are being proposed in every which direction. The reason why Alberta's tar sands is considered the largest project on the earth is because of the infrastructure associated with it. It's not from the individual projects itself. What's even more alarming is that in 2014, TransCanada railroaded a pipeline in Alberta called the Grand Rapids Pipeline. This pipeline is a 900 barrel per day pipeline from Fort McMurray, just south of my community, to Edmonton, where the other port, where they have a station that would fill other pipelines like the Keystone XL. They deny the association and the connection between Grand Rapids and the Keystone XL pipeline. It's owned by the same company, and the capacity is very similar. So we have to start drawing those lines of connection. So those are 2 major projects. My nation has a legal challenge against the Grand Rapids pipeline because it was constructed without our consent and without our consultation, and they deemed us, again, not impacted. And the Teck Frontier Mine, we need all the support we can get in challenging that project, because we're talking about a time when we want to be lessening our dependency on oil. We want to be doing things to move away from the fossil fuel sector, and yet we are proposing the largest ever open pit mine. And it's right next to my community, and we have to stop it. And the voices of the American people and connecting it to things like KXL is going to be critical. We stopped the Shell Pierre River mine. They pulled it completely, their whole application, and we stopped the Jack Pine mine expansion. They still haven't gotten their approvals from us, and it's all because of connecting the dots. And American folks, you guys had a big part of that, and we want you to support not just stopping this pipeline, but stopping the expansion of Alberta's tar sands. You can look for more information on some of these things at indigenousclimateaction.com. We'll be putting out action alerts for supporting the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation. And again, looking to the money. I want to throw it back over to Lindsay, because Tech Resources, TransCanada, we do have to find other ways to get these companies and hit them where it hurts, and hit them below the belt, and that's where their money is. And so I really, really think that if you can't go to a protest, there's other ways to do this. There's letter writing campaigns. There's so many different ways we can get involved.
Thanks so much, Eriel. Oh, go ahead, Lindsay.
Well, I was just going to add one thing. So every year, actually, in partnership with Sierra Club, we do a report card that assesses how the banks are doing in terms of the most damaging projects that they're supporting. And last year, we profiled as one of our lead examples of extreme oil investments that banks are making. We profiled this tech mine. So if folks are interested, we're gonna this year update our report card. You can find it on our website. The banks really hate it because they get passing or failing grade, and none of them are passing, as you can imagine. So we'll continue to have updates on this project as well. And you can see the list of all the banks who are supporting this type of extraction in the tar sands.
Great. And can people find that on your website, Lindsay?
Yes, they can.
Great.
RAND.org.
RAND.org. Thanks. So we have a lot of great questions coming in. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and direct it to Jane. We have some questions coming in this one is from Salt Lake City. And the question is, are out-of-state comments to commissioners in Nebraska helpful? And what can people outside of Nebraska do to help?
Yeah, so out-of-state comments are absolutely welcome. We definitely do not want to create the scenario where public service commissioners think that this pipeline is only about Nebraska's water. This pipeline affects all of us when it comes to climate change, when it comes to water, when it comes to setting the precedent that we can continue to trample on Native Americans' treaty and sovereign rights and landowners' property rights. So all comments welcome from all states. Make calls, make letters, do formal comments, travel to Nebraska when public hearings are set. We will know those dates soon, and we will publish them on boldnebraska.org. And then we will be announcing some creative actions to help stop Keystone XL soon. So certainly watch our website as well as 350.org's. We're not ready to announce those, but I think everybody will be definitely excited. And I hope that people will continue to donate to those projects. As a quick reminder, we built a barn inside the Keystone XL route the last time we were fighting this, and it has solar panels and a wind turbine outside it. And that was only created because people donated almost $70,000 to make that happen. That was all small donors. No big donor came in and made that project happen. So we'll have lots of creative actions like that folks can contribute to if you can't physically come to Nebraska, or if you don't want to write letters and make phone calls as well.
Thanks so much, Jane. So the next question, we're getting a lot of questions about how to strategically use civil disobedience. People want, and I'm not sure exactly who to direct this to. I think a couple different people could answer this question, but I think the question is, how do we use nonviolent direct action, civil disobedience to fight this pipeline in a moment where Trump is not going to be the most likely decision maker to change his mind. So does anyone want to take that question? Lindsay, why don't you go for it, and I might pass it to Bill as well.
Great. Yeah, I know. I was looking at other speakers to see who might want to take it first. I'm honored to get things started. So in terms of direct action and civil disobedience, one of the things that I really think of is the old saying that I'm going to really ineffectively summarize, but it's essentially like power is never given, it's taken. And one of the opportunities that we have right now is to broaden and strengthen a movement that does so in a way that is peaceful and creative, but the resistance is an actual putting your body on the line type of resistance. It can happen along a route, or it can happen in front of a bank, or it can happen in front of a TransCanada building, right? We know the folks in power who we do think can be, you know, at least pressured, attention can be brought to them. You know, it's great when we target TransCanada and it brings the risk and the frustration at the fact that they're again putting this pipeline forward right to their doorstep. So we become an unavoidable force, you know, in a way that, yes, standing outside of the White House might not convince Trump. Standing outside of Citibank is really compelling when they literally cannot continue business as usual when we are standing right in the way and in front of those facilities. That said, you know, direct action does create different risks for different people, depending on how police might respond to you, security might respond to you, or the way that more extreme charges might be brought. It is a different climate we're living in under Trump. And so we would encourage people to really build supportive networks in their community, or to lean on organizations like ours and others who have a history of doing this, and work to provide different legal resources, work to provide an understanding of what you're getting into. So we do have a pledge of resistance up on our website as well. We'll do a training tour. I know that Bold, Stand, they've been doing some of this work as well. Exciting time to learn to do it safely.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I want to pass it to Bill to answer the same question as well.
Well, just to follow up, look, what Lindsay said is very smart. Civil disobedience is one tool in the activist toolbox. Like any tool, you don't want to use it all the time because then it gets dull, literally and figuratively. So the key is figuring out how to use things smartly. And at the moments when they have a possible effect. And there's lots of people have good ideas about that. I know that when Eriel or Jane or Wayne or people might call on us to do this sort of stuff, we'll be there to do it. It's been a while since we've had to spend the night in jail over the Keystone pipeline, and it wouldn't surprise me if we had to do it again. But as always, most of the work that goes on is less dramatic, and it's the daily grind of writing and petition signing and Facebooking and tabling out in front of things and spreading the word and getting people engaged. It's really powerful stuff, all of it, and all the things that various people can bring to the table are just as important.
Thanks, Bill. And I think Eriel wants to weigh in on this too.
Yeah, I you know, civil disobedience has always been a key factor in a lot of successes of many social justice campaigns, so whether it's environmental or human rights campaigns, and Indigenous folks are obviously no stranger to that. But I do want to bring up some really critical things that we need to think about on racial realities. Like Indigenous folks, people of color, they are often going to have much more harsher pushback and punishments, as we all saw at Standing Rock with the type of brutality that was sort of put onto the people at Standing Rock. And we really have to think about that. And there is a whole camp of activists and organizers that have done some really, really great work on looking at civil disobedience and how allies can support people of color, particularly Indigenous folks. And there's the Indigenous Peoples Power Project that's been a project under Ruckus that's really supported that intersectionality of like white allies working with folks of color. And we really have to like look at how those allies can use their bodies and put them on the front of the lines in civil disobedience times where people are risking arrest. It's absolutely necessary that those people are the first ones crossing the lines and putting their bodies forward. And there's this really great movement going on with a lot of the older folks that are like, I'm so old, so I've already established my career, I've already done things that I want to do. So I challenge some of the baby boomers that are like now entering into retirement to like put their bodies on the line and stand up for those that have been marginalized and oppressed. I mean, Indigenous folks, people of color, we represent the most largest statistics in federal prisons in the United States and in Canada. And we can't allow the further punishment of that within the civil disobedience movement. So I just really hope that you guys see this as a tactic and a moment for us to collaborate together and be co-conspirators. Let's not just be allies, let's be co-conspirators in this whole movement to destabilizing the decision makers that are taking us down the wrong paths.
Thanks, Eriel. And I'm going to give a shout out to my mom, who is a baby boomer who got arrested for Keystone and also just got arrested for DAPL. So calling on some of the older folks to put their bodies on the line. I want to actually wrap us up. We have a lot more good questions that maybe our panelists can take to Twitter and answer some of them on Twitter. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up, and I'm going to give all of the presenters a chance to just give some last words, some last thoughts to leave us with. And one question I'm hoping that some folks can cover in their last words, it was a question, is just about who is sort of coordinating some of the Indigenous resistance to this pipeline and other projects, and who we should look to for leadership there. So does anyone want to go first? And we'll just go along the line. Closing thoughts to leave our audience with.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. So it's like unbelievable that all the leaders on the phone are not jumping in. So you're invited to Nebraska, and I know Wayne would obviously love you in South Dakota. We felt like we were the heart of the resistance on Keystone XL last time around between Nebraska and South Dakota. So we invite you to come again. You can definitely get all the facts about Keystone XL and the Public Service Commission process for Nebraska on boldnebraska.org. But I just want to leave you with the fact that nobody gave us a fighting chance to beat Keystone XL back in 2008 and 2010 and 2012 and 2014 when we beat Keystone XL all along the way. And so the only way that we will continue to win is if we continue to believe together as allies that we will get this done together. And, the Indigenous Environmental Network is obviously the key leader in organizing Indigenous leadership and activism on these pipeline fights. And we also have several Nebraska tribes that are already leading. So the Ponca tribe in particular, and Chairman Larry Wright, who is a young chairman, is very engaged in doing everything he can to make sure that this pipeline never crosses the Ponca Trail of Tears. So look to the Indigenous Environmental Network, but also look to the Great Sioux Nation and the Ponca tribe and the Pawnee and the Winnebago here in Nebraska, because they are all hands on deck.
I'll follow up, Jane. Thanks, Jane. Thank you all for your perseverance. We can do it. They haven't broke ground, and with being together and getting the word out again, I think we'll be able to get this stopped. 45th, I have no faith in. So.
Bill, you seem to be breaking up. You might want to go off video. You want to try again?
In Nebraska and South, I did it all in Washington, D.C. 29th. Our solidarity is the thing that will win this fight for us.
Amen.
Eriel's right. We get to make sure not just stop the pipelines, we stop the whole damn pipelines to begin with.
Thanks, Bill. You broke up for a lot of that, but what we heard was solidarity.
Stop the whole damn thing. That was the line that came through, and that was the best line.
Thank you, Bill. Lindsay, can we go to you next?
Sure. So yeah, stop the whole damn thing. Stop oil extraction, full stop. I think, you know, one of the things that I would echo that's been said a lot is it's along the lines of we're more powerful than we realize. And one of the insights that I would just share from the very interesting meetings that we have with banks is they are terrified of us. And they feel like there is a sea change coming, that it's challenging their business model. And literally one of the banks that we were talking to actually stopped me when I was speaking and said, is there really a lot of indigenous resistance to the Keystone pipeline? And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. You know, you are about to get hit in the face with a train and you're barely noticing that there's, you know, that trains exist. So I think we've only had a taste of what we're likely to see. That's just one aspect of how powerful we are. And in terms of other co-conspirators and indigenous-led organizations, some of the others that I would just mention related to the Keystone XL push on banks, in addition to IEN, Indigenous Environmental Network, and Indigenous Peoples Power, is Honor the Earth and Native Organizers Alliance. And thank you, everybody. Excited to see you all across North America resisting this pipeline.
Mike, you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Lindsay, Jane, Eriel, Bill, being on the call. Thanks, everybody, for joining the call. You know, if you've been a part of this call for the whole time, then you've heard us all be both determined and realistic about our chances. You know, we're not just throwing sunshine and puppy dogs at you. We know that we're in a challenging spot, and that it's going to take our best organizing, our best strategizing, and the best example of solidarity and cross-movement organizing that we can all put together. Clearly, we have to shift our focus away from one decision maker in the White House towards many different banks that are bankrolling this project, and many different states and many different courts who will have a ruling. So I guess to sum it all up, we're going to have to outthink and outwork and out-organize our opponents. And I have 100% confidence that we can do that. We are part of a visionary and very beautiful movement that is rooted in solidarity, that's rooted in justice, that is working every day for an inclusive, clean energy economy that works for everybody. And that is an idea that is more powerful than any of our opponents and their lawyers and their contacts inside the White House. So I'm confident that we'll prevail. And thanks again for organizing the call.
Thanks, Mike. And Eriel, you get the last word.
I just want to say, first off, just a little bit of a correction. IEN is sort of running the campaign for the northern segment, challenging the Keystone XL, and that there are other indigenous groups and tribes all along the pipeline in the United States that are working independently and in coalition with IEN and Honor the Earth, IP3, and other organizations. And in Canada, there actually hasn't been a central Indigenous-led social movement vehicle. Indigenous Climate Action is a new project that I'm working on, and we'll be the first climate justice, Indigenous-led climate justice organization in Canada. So we're really trying to help mobilize with some of the folks, but there's also a treaty alliance that's happening in Canada with Indigenous people. Over 120 different First Nations and tribal Indigenous folks from the United States have signed on to stop the expansion of tar sands and tar sands pipelines and infrastructure. And there's a lot of really, really, really great stuff happening in Indian country. Just to sort of follow up on Mike, you know, it is about taking back the power and righting the wrongs of this sort of corrupt backwards government. But I do think that we have to be thinking about Indigenous folks and Indigenous rights and where they lie in the equation of a lot of these struggles. Indigenous folks and our struggles have been used as a sort of pinnacle to leverage and uphold a lot of these struggles and put a face and a struggle at the heart of these issues. You know, it's been Indigenous rights whose culture, whose lands and identities have been eroded and degraded by these fossil fuel extraction projects, whether it's tar sands or fracking or Bakken oil fields or the coal mines in Australia. It's Indigenous folks that are at the front. And yet there is a simple lack of power of Indigenous peoples to be decision makers in not only the right of ways and the decisions of the course of these projects, but within government as a whole. We need to be looking at ways to empower Indigenous people who have been disempowered since 1492. We need to be taking that and flipping it on its head. We see a resurgence of Indigenous peoples into the political sphere and at the front of these campaigns, and yet we still lack the simple ability to have power and decision making that is critical to our cultural survival as Indigenous folks. So a part of this struggle offers us a tremendous opportunity to right the wrongs that have been done to Indigenous folks and talk about a redistribution of power, a redistribution of privilege to allow communities to take control and ownership over their lands and territories that have been taken away from us since 1492. And so I really, really, really think that we need to be talking about some of the core critical issues that have allowed us to get to this point. Indigenous folks have been fighting and challenging the extraction and destruction of our territories since colonization began. And we need to uplift those stories and help redistribute those powers, because at the heart of all of this, it's capitalism and it's colonialism. And I hope that we can find ways to find this Keystone XL pipeline, tar sands, and climate change as a way to deconstruct and start a conversation around decolonization. Thank you, Masitro.
Thank you, Eriel. That was a beautiful way to close. I just want to take a moment to just thank all of the presenters for their time, for their leadership, and also to the thousands of people who tuned in tonight. Thank you all so much. Let's continue to fight together, and we will see you in the streets. Bye, everyone.